Hello, it's Professor Troy again. I'm going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting the Polhemus system now, and I'll go through just a couple of ways that you can work on configuring and setting the system up, but I will refer you also to the user manual, which is in fact the best documentation of how to get the system set up. So let me start here with a couple of different files that are available. So if you go, I have them on my desktop, but I don't think you will. If you hit all programs, okay, so you can get to Polhemus, and then you'll see that there's a couple of different programs. So there's G4, there's PDI, and there's this Pi Manager. So G4 has a couple of different things here. One is this create source configuration file, one is the source orientation measurement application, and one is the system setup. Okay, if things are really broken, you may need to go to the system setup, but almost certainly you will not need to do that. Unless it's totally uninstalled, in which case you should definitely contact Elise Favreau or myself, and we will help you with that. Let's take a look at the source orientation setup though, just so that you can see what it looks like. These are things that you may want to change at some point. First of all, you can see that it deals mostly with orientation units. In this case, we're having it give us Euler angles in degrees, but you could have it give you orientation measure units in another thing. So one of the things we need to do is actually connect to the G4. Okay, so that's the name of the system. Okay, so right now it doesn't detect any hubs, and it would like to have at least one hub connected, and it really wants it to be hardwired for this connection. Okay, and so what we would have to do if we wanted to do this is unplug these two sensors and then take the hub, and what I've got right here is my USB charger, which normally is connected to the wall, but instead I've got it plugged directly into the front of the computer here. Okay, so I'm going to plug that in. Let's see here. Come on. Okay. And you see now it is got an orange LED on it. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is go back here and hit connect to G4. Come on. Okay. We're going to try this again. I'm going to actually unplug this. And instead I'm going to turn it on. Okay, so my blue lights have found the hub. Okay, so we're going to try this again. Okay, hey, look at that. Okay, so now it says position sensor 1 near the source. Point the sensor in the plus X direction with the bottom of the sensor pointing in the plus Z direction of the system reference. Okay, so I lied. This is actually not the setup situation that I thought. So we need to plug back in our sensor. Okay, so again I've got sensor 1 plugged in. Only I have to know which one is actually sensor 1. Okay, so here's my sensor 1. So now I look at my sensor here. Okay, so this is actually the way that my sensor goes, with the plus X direction actually moves in along this line here. Okay, so what I need to do is point my sensor in the plus X direction, and I have the bottom of my sensor pointing in the plus Z direction, which is down to the floor. Okay, and so what I've got now, if you go over here, you see it says ready to measure. Now if I move my sensor too far away, it says here get closer to the source. Okay, now it says ready to measure. So what it's doing there is it's actually trying to configure which way is up in the world of my sensor. Okay. Now I don't have 3 hands, so I'm going to do my best to try and do this here. Okay. Okay, so it says ready to measure, and I'm going to click measure source orientation. Okay. So what it's done is it's come up with 3 angles, 0, 0, and 0. And basically what that tells me is that my my source, like the directions that I have printed on my source are actually what I want them to be. Okay, so I don't find this to be a super useful utility, but it can actually help you tell whether things are functional or not. Okay, so the next troubleshooting utility that you could get to. All right, let's go back to G4. Okay, so that was the source orientation measurement app. System setup, we're not going to worry about. Let's look at the create source config file. This one is a little bit more useful because basically what it tells you is how you are going to treat the source. Okay, so in other words, this is where if you wanted to flip the axes of your orientation, for example, so that plus Z pointed up, this is the place to do it. Okay, so here's also, you remember when I talked about starting things up, I said that you should always start with the sensors in the plus X hemisphere. So here's where you could adjust that, startup hemisphere. So right now it's set for positive X. The other thing is there's a floor compensation algorithm, and again, this is an algorithm to deal with the electromagnetic distortion of the field due to metal in the floor. Okay. So, so what we can do is we can open an existing configuration file. Okay, so we have one. We just call it default. And basically what it does is it does not rotate the axes at all, and it does not translate the axes at all. Okay, so this is the translation here. This is the rotation. The reason it might be useful to translate the axes is, for example, if you have a force plate that you're collecting data with concurrently, then you may want to actually measure and figure out where the location of your 0, 0, 0 in your force plate is. And then you could actually translate your electromagnetic tracking system so that the 0, 0, 0 actually coincide with your force plate 0, 0, 0. So that would basically save you some work at the back end in terms of fixing stuff. Okay. So again, here I can change this hemisphere to be anything, so I can make it positive X. I might want to change my floor compensation. This tells me how high off the ground is my source. Usually our source is somewhere between 75 and 100 centimeters off the floor. And then we need to actually load the calibration file. Okay, and again, this has already been taken care of somewhere, but I can't ever remember where this silly thing is. Okay, so G4 files, it's not in there, so it might be in that program files x86 thing. Okay, it certainly is, if nothing else, on one of those CDs, which is in the thing, but I'm pretty sure I put it in here. No. Okay, so if you get to the point where you need a calibration file, then you will find it on this lovely CD here, which says Source A calibration file. There we go. Okay, so if you need it, there it is. But we have already set this up, so you should never, ever, ever need to do that. Okay, but those are the things to check. So you probably don't ever really need to mess with this. Okay, so I'm just going to hit close. What are the other possible things that you could want to change? Okay, in Pi Manager, let's say for some reason you find that it's not seeing your hubs and your sensors, right? That's where I would go back and test to make sure that everything has charged up correctly. I would make sure that I would try that. I would try that source orientation file to make sure that it's actually streaming the data correctly. And then here there are a number of different things that you can do. Okay, so you can check your tracker configuration. And again, sort of here's your units, which I can never seem to get to report in anything other than inches. Here's your degrees, which we don't really talk about. And again, sort of inches, foot, centimeter, etc. So I mean, there's a number of different configurations. The hub configuration, so again, right now we only have one hub. You recall that the hubs are this thing here, whereas the trackers or the sensors are these guys here. Okay, so the hub configuration, again, there's not really a whole lot you can do with these. So the main thing, and then the other thing that you can change is your graphics. Okay, the graphics is useful because it can help. What you may want to do is rotate it so that you're visualizing things in real time. Okay, so for example, if I hit, I'm going to turn on my data for a second. So here is my, I'm going to just wave my little sensor around. So I have my sensor here, waving it. Okay, and here it is. So I can actually use the arrow keys. So my arrow keys on the computer. And what I can do is I can actually rotate. So sometimes for visualization purposes, like you may want to actually change it so that up is actually up, okay? And sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but you know, once you've rotated this around a bit, you can generally figure out how to orient your world so that it's the same as what you're seeing here. Okay, so those are the main things to check. Major problems that you might encounter really have to do with data points being dropped here. Okay, and if that's the case, number one thing to check is how well charged are your hubs. Number two thing to check is what's the distance between your RF dongle and your hubs. It should be between about 1 and 6 feet. Number three thing to check is how close in proximity are all three of these items. Okay, again, they should all be within a few feet of each other. I personally find that having the hub on the side of your person that is closest to the dongle helps. Okay, so you know, technically it shouldn't matter. It should be able to shoot through a person, but I find if you're, you know, to put it close to the dongle, just in close physical proximity. Okay, so those are the major troubleshooting things. Hopefully this is helpful for you, and good luck using the system.